through a Africa. And so she heard the story first from Skype. She's like, I'm not going to just come if she's got a, it doesn't make sense story. So I told her very, passionately and very clearly what I wanted the vision of Subira to be. So she took a flight down. We were here. She was with me for 3 weeks. And we agreed on the amount, signed the contract. She gave me the structure. So the content was there for the story, but my structure, because I haven't been to film school, was missing. So she did the structure for me, which is very important. And once that came on board, so I think story is really the hero of any film, and for you to get the finance, in order for you to get the finance, the team is very important, who are your players, the key players. So through Vibeka, I also got my very good cinematographer, the local A-list crew, things like that. So I saved money, and for example, when Talib is a very good cinematographer from Denmark, he said, I only shoot on Alexa, the camera. How do we hadn't budgeted for that. So the Danish embassy here had a fund called Danida that gave money to Kenyan films if 90% of the money was Kenyan. So we got lucky because we had to be in production, and we were literally in pre-production when we got to know the camera cost that much. So the Danes put in money, and the Europeans are like that, for those of you familiar, that they will give money to their own producers. So for example, the part that they put in, it was very little, 10%, but it helped us get the camera, and then for that 10%, my producer got to keep the Scandinavian territory. So I don't get the profits from that. She gets the profit. That's the exchange, because the government doesn't want it, soft money for them. So that's how the European formula, and I think Banuri can also tell you more about that, works. So this is how it happened. And then part of my post-production was here with Rose. She did the editing of the first couple of drafts, and then we took it to LA. And there, the Homeland, TV series on Netflix, the editor of that, he loved the Lamu scenes, and he, on of course very reduced prices, did Subira. Then through him, sound designer, also works at Universal Studios. He came on board. I had a particular budget, but we had a very good film, by then. So he came on board. So, and then the color gradist happened in LA, and the sound design and the score of the film, but within budget. And I think if you have passion, and if you have high standards, and if you have a limited budget, people will come forward, But the hero is not finance, it's the script, really.
All right, thank you. And next to Wanori.
So, like Sipi, our film took a long time to finance. It took 7 years, and we went through many different grant organizations. So we applied to all grant organizations that we could, and many times our script was rejected, right? But we would take notes and go back. So there's some funds that we applied to 3 times. And we were just like, oh, you've said no. Why did you say no? Okay, thanks. Let's write notes. Now will you say no? And we just kept on doing that. And at the same time, you start to build a relationship with the people who you're getting money from, right? And they become invested in your project as well, and they want to see it do well. So we got, because like Tony said, we don't have co-production agreements. So we had a Kenyan production company co-producing with a South African production company, and the South African production company was able to make co-production agreements with different countries. So we had 7 different countries involved: Belgium, France, the Netherlands, Germany, Sweden, and there's other places I'm forgetting. Oh, I think I think like Istanbul. And somewhere else. But that's how we managed to get money. We also managed to get the EU fund, and if you're not familiar with it, please look it up. It's a ton of paperwork, I'm not going to lie. It's called the ACP fund, ACP. African, Caribbean, Pacific Fund. And they give you up to 40% of your budget. But it's a lot of paperwork. and then it's a lot of like they're very rigorous about how you report your money and everything like that. But it gives you up to 40%, and truly that's what also allowed us to keep artistic freedom, because often when you get money from other places, they can tell you how to edit. And if you want to be able to keep your artistic freedom, you want to be able to get grants that give you the freedom to do for you to have a director's cut. So we went through all of those, and then right at the end, we got some equity funding at the end. But even when we started filming, we didn't have all the money. So because we had been fundraising for so long, and we run was the one that we really had, and it was about to expire. So we decided that we're going to start shooting before we had all the money. And while we were shooting, we started fundraising for post-production. And while we were in post-production, we, for edit, when we were in edit, we raised money for post-production, which is grading, sound design, and everything. When we were in sound design, we started raising money for deliverables, because that's something that people don't tell you. It costs a lot of money to just deliver your film. Just to deliver it. To is a lot of money. And when you're going into theaters and when you're going to festivals, they want either a Blu-ray or a DCP. So to just be able to deliver, it costs a lot of money. So then our equity funding came in for our deliverables, and also to be able to attend festivals, because unlike what they say, it also costs money to go to a festival. Right, so that's how we started piecing together all that money. But because of we had a couple of film investors and some equity, so Rafiki still hasn't broken even, to be super honest, and we're hoping that after the next run, because it's about to release in the UK and the US theatrically, we're hoping that helps us break even. But that means that we don't make a profit, we just break even. But that can be the nature of film, especially from this side. But because there's new people in the market like Netflix coming in, they have the possibility of coming in and buying the film at the end as well. So those are really, really good partners to start thinking about. But also remember that when they take your film, they take it forever, ever, 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 amen. So be clear about the terms of your contract and negotiate. Don't feel, oh, it's Netflix, we can't negotiate. Never. Never, never, never. Always fight for what you feel. And even if you don't know what you feel is best, ask. And then fight for that, because that's really the only way. And to also start a relationship. Bargaining is the creation of a relationship as well. So that's some of the ways that we kind of financed Rafiki.
All right, thank you. And now we go to Phoebe Rogoro.
Okay, well, listening to what everyone has said, I think there are similarities and some differences in how we all went about funding the movies. For us, for Rock Pictures, it was our first feature film, so we'd never actually, let's say, gone through the stress of actually trying to fund a movie. We'd done short films before, and through that we'd funded them through, student finance or some savings and such. But this time, 18 hours, when we did our first budget, we did it and it came to 4.5 million. And at first we were optimistic. I was actually very optimistic. I was like, 4.5 million, that's not a lot. You have lots of rich people. We can do it. But actually, after a bit of going around, we came to the decision that we couldn't actually make 4.5. So the journey actually started with one of our co-producers, Brenda Irimo, connected the rest of the team, Joe and Fwani, and then they met. He's a university professor. His name is Robert, a very good guy. And when they met him, they just told him, look, we have a story. It's about a paramedic who's trying to save a road crash victim. It's based or inspired by a story that had happened in 2015. And then, because Robert, the investor, felt like, oh, I've been through something similar. So he was like, I'll give you guys money. So he gave, I think it was 400,000 shillings. I think that was that was the opening figure. if I'm not wrong. And so from there, at that point, I wasn't actually around. I was still going around trying to find money, and I wasn't very successful, and I was very discouraged that I hadn't contributed. And so the next step was to kind of network with people. I know people always say, oh, do this, do that, but actually it's really hard to do anything unless you are connected to people. So I went to an event where there was a, it was a diaspora meeting basically, and I met this really lovely woman who's a doctor with her husband, and she's from Kisumu, and I told her about the movie, and she wanted to do some brand, she had a cream and she wanted to have it on the movie as brand placement, so we said, hey, you come on board, we'll put your cream in there. And I don't even think she cared so much about the cream. She was really, because she's a doctor, so she was like, this is really personal and it's really important to tell this story. So she gave us around 650,000 shillings to make the film. And then the rest of it was really kind of our combined savings to put towards the movie. And then, so we got to our working figure of 1.3 shillings. And it was very hard because we were like, how are we going to move from 4.5 million on paper to working with 1.3? It was very challenging, and really it changed how I think about funding, on the basis that, in terms of paying people or getting resources. For example, shooting in hospitals. We shot in Machakos because it was, Machakos are super friendly to filmmakers, so we went there because we didn't have to pay much in terms of, or anything really, for the licensing, and they were very cooperative. And so yeah, I mean, really to summarize it, we just funded it through private individual investment and slash brand placement and savings.
All right, so that's a brief introduction of how they financed the film, and I'll let you guys ask some questions. But before that, I have one question I want to ask the panelists myself, is what influences your decision towards where to go for financing? Because we've all seen that everyone had a different path, everyone had a different way of financing, and there are a ton of different ways. But I want to understand what influences your decision. Is it the money that's available, or is it who is the best partner for me, or what are some of the thoughts you go through before deciding who funds the film?
Okay, so first, for us, it was super simple. We found all the grants that give money to fictional films, and then we applied for all of them. A lot of them, because they're co-production, like Tony said, what happens with co-production financing sometimes is you get money if it's a co-production. So let's say I get a French grant, and a grant really means money that you don't have to pay back, right? But to get a French grant, what they do, because the Europeans are super clever about this, is that you have to spend that money in their country. So you get a French grant, you have to employ French people or get French equipment. Right? Same thing with Germany. That's why we ended up doing, that's why we edited in France, because it was French money. We had a French sound guy because we needed sound, and that's the money that we had. We did our color grade and our sound in Germany because we had a German grant, and that money had to be spent in Germany. So those are some of the considerations that you take. But also, once you get a grant, even if you apply for a grant yourself, once you get that grant, you have to find a producer in that country. So you find the money, and then you look for a producer. Or, luckily, sometimes it comes to both of them at the same time. But you find the money, and then you look for a producer. So when you're looking for a producer, you try and find somebody who is kind of who understands your story, who has it ends up being a sort of a marriage. So you want to go into the relationship with somebody who will fight for your film, who believes in your film, who will work for your film. you know, and when it comes to sales, who will push for that territory? Because when you get a co-producer, they are usually responsible for finding a sales agent in that territory. So you have to find somebody who's going to negotiate the best deals for you in that territory. So so it was super basic. So we started with just a basic spreadsheet of these are the grants that give you money. And there's many grants that give fictional films money, to be clear. So we started there. We then started applying for them. Like Sippy said, your script has to be good. And then once we got the money, then we came back and we started looking for the producers. But at every point, the one thing that we wanted to make sure is that we retain the artistic story, so that there's no one who's able to say, we think this is what should happen in your film, we think this is the way you should cut your film. We wanted to be able to retain director's cut. So that was a negotiation when it came to now looking for partnerships.
Yeah. So, you know, going into the second feature, now I have a calling card. You know what I'm capable of doing. So the second feature film is an Indian story based in Nairobi. So all of a sudden, you know, it opens up Indian investors. So for example, there's Z Studios and they have money, you know. And also I can use Indian cast, at least the main cast. With cast comes money. So all of a sudden I'm thinking more, of course I'm a writer. I will tell the story I want to tell and I'll direct it. But I must think as a producer as well, you know. And today when I was looking at all these, the booths outside, in my story I find Lake Naivasha very inspiring, you know. And this girl is going to be an artist. So there's Nakuru County and Naivasha is under that. And we might get, you know, Nakuru County to give us Naivasha shooting for free, like Lamu did. So you have to start, you know, thinking we are not privileged enough to have, you know, well-fleshed out producers yet and, you know, directors. It's happening. But you have to be clever and think of many things. Where is my money going to come from? What kind of a story do I write? I just don't want a normal story. I want that wow factor in the story, you know. So it's all connected. That's why it's the matrix of finance, really. It's not by itself.
All right, thank you. Tony?
Yes. So documentary, because I think I'm the only documentary person here, has a slightly different path. Same but similar. So usually when you're structuring, how am I going to look for money? First you do a budget, then you do a finance plan. Yeah, and the finance plan just basically says, what are all the grants that could possibly give me money that could add up to, let's say if my budget is 100,000 shillings. Okay, where are all the grants I can go to? Where are all the broadcasts that I can go to that can add up to 100,000 shillings? And your finance plan keeps on changing based on where you're taking your project to. With documentaries, I cannot emphasize this enough. There's so much interest in independent voices from Africa telling stories. Because what's been happening before in the past, and there's nothing wrong with it, but it's been Western people coming here and telling stories of Africans. And they're very interested in getting young African filmmakers telling us what is our truth. Yeah, and I think documentaries are very important and can be really, really entertaining, and also can be a basis for very strong fiction films, because that's what's happening in America. A lot of fiction films and series are being done off strong documentaries, like Wild Wild Country, which is on Netflix, is now being turned into a fiction series. So it's an interesting way to be able to get existing intellectual property, which already has an audience, so that you can be able to take that to people to get investment. So one last point. So where you decide to get the money from, with documentary, there are also different platforms outside of grants and broadcasters, such as pitching forums, where you can be able to go as a team, pitch your project and be able to get different investors on board. We went to pitch at Hot Docs Forum last year. We were the first Kenyans to get in. And because of our involvement in that, and I think also because of the first Kenyans and because people love the project, that's where we got a lot of our funding from. So I would encourage a lot of people, if you have an independent feature project, apply to pitching forums like Hot Docs Forum, which happens at the beginning of the year. And then there's also Forum, which happens at the end of the year. So try and look for those avenues.
All right, Phoebe.
Well, for me, funding a film or even just funding anything is a political decision. I am I'm going to sound different just because I'm going to be the one of the people who says, don't go applying for grants. But that's just me, because I feel like in the industry so far, most of the films that, we call Kenyans or that have resonated with us in one way or another have been films made by people who are not, funded rather by people who are not Kenyan or from Africa or so. So I feel like 18 hours for me was the beginning of that journey, kind of saying, okay, we are all here because we want the industry to grow. But at the same time, we're also saying, like Tony said, you want to tell your own story. But I don't see it being so different from the time when, white Europeans or Americans would come here and make a movie and then, sell that as African. I don't see it being different to now when all the Africans are going there and saying, help me make my story, because politically, I don't see the difference. They're still the ones funding, and even when you see all the posters or whatever, the people standing in them, it's not always, the Kenyans or the Africans. So I feel in terms of making a decision to fund a movie, I feel it's important we make a statement that we can make and fund a movie from right here. Like us ourselves, we can fund these movies. There are people in the country, you have corporates, you have individuals who do want to get into filmmaking. When we met Robert, he'd never funded a movie. But he was like, I really like filmmaking, But people also have, because I also met other investors who are like, I'm not so sure about investing in your movie because it's so NGO. Like, don't you guys get money from grants, and aren't you an NGO sector? But if our goal is to show that the Kenyan film industry is working towards merging the film, the art, and the business, then we have to work that way. We have to function in a way that it's not always asking. I feel we need to work more towards transactional, business in the movie. There are corporates who are willing to, for example, Nollywood, they funded their movies through private investment now. I've been speaking to some people who are like, actually our corporates have opened up. The private sector is building those industries, and I feel that's where we need to get to. And I also feel we can't talk about funding per se without talking about distribution as well, because if you fund, for example, distribution is, this whole thing is a huge mess. You don't even know where to begin. But when you make a movie, for a lot of people, there's that lack of connection, because now we've become so aware and we've become so vocal about our thoughts politically that when you go to someone, sometimes, we do look to see who's made that film. Because sometimes, I've been around people and a trailers come out and everyone's, oh, yeah, Inimoto. And then it's like, who's made, oh, all right, Germans made it. Oh, okay, well, typical then, And it's like, we want our people to, I feel as Kenyans, we need to make content for ourselves and for us in a way that we can say, oh, we funded that, we had our own people working behind the scenes, our own people fed that, because otherwise it's not sustainable. Because imagine how many people in the world right now are applying for grants to BFI or to the French or to the Europeans. There's so many people, so you might as well think, what can we do here? As opposed to living here and then going all over to the other side of the world just for someone in Kiambu to watch your film. You might as well start in Kiambu, go around, talk to somebody, hey, nipe tuka. I can't, doesn't just put a, what's the Swahili saying? Aba na haba ujaza kibaba. We start there. 1.3 million is not it was difficult to raise it, don't get me wrong, but it's not a humongous amount. Yes, Sayuki, maybe no one will give you 100 million to start off with, but maybe someone will say, I'll give you 100K, or I'll do this. Or even so, let's think of funding differently. Let it not just be, I want cash. Maybe you're a corporate. Just say, okay, fine, you don't have to give me money, but when we start marketing our movie, can you give your customers, tickets to see our movie? So like buy tickets and then give them to your customers for free. So I feel we need to look for sustainable ways that we can engage the private sector as well as the government, even though they fail us sometimes, but we have to find a way that we can work together on the ground over here and then build the industry upwards, because otherwise we are going to lose all our filmmakers.
All right. So now I'll open the discussion to questions and I'll pass the mic. So here I see the first one. So we'll take 3 questions, and then they answer, and then if there are more questions, we can still ask them.
Hello, my name is Bill Afodi. I'm a co-founder at Rock Pictures. First of all, I want to congratulate all of you for your wonderful films. Rafiki, Subira, 18 Hours, and Tony, and your films. Very good work, and it's I don't know where the men are. I think tunafaa kuwa pale. Sawa. Anyway, my question goes to Anuri. Your very first film, From a Whisper. I just want to know what model you used to finance it, and what made you, if it was different, what made you change your model to sourcing for finance for Rafiki from abroad and overseas? Yes, thank you.
So From a Whisper was locally funded, and we did the exact same thing. We had local investors and local private investors mostly, and savings that we were able to do From a Whisper with. So that's how we started. With Rafiki, the budget was exceptionally larger than From a Whisper. So and also because of the subject of the film, we found a lot of resistance raising money locally. So we started to look for ways to raise money in other places. So we just started to look, because what was important for us was to make sure that we get the film made, and make sure that the film was made in Kenya, and make sure that we were able to retain creativity, the creative cut. So it really just came to a point. It just came to scale. We couldn't find, and also the subject matter. There was no one who was trying to fund Rafiki when we were looking for money over the 7 years in Kenya at all, except a couple. Actually, we have a couple of private investors from Kenya. But because of the scale of it, we needed a lot more money, and that money really was more readily available from grants and equity, and mostly international films, not even here, but also wherever. They're all financed from finding money from all over the place.
All right, thank you. Another question.
Thank you. My name is Tiawa Charles from Kampala. I want to appreciate the ladies over there for the wonderful work you're doing. My interest here is about how we can make the East African film industry something to be recognized by the world. And I'm looking at my own perspective into looking at funding for film. I would, I'm not bashing the issue of looking for grants, but when you look at the business sense of it, that if you had to make film for 7 years, then we are not going to make films in East Africa, and to compete with maybe Nollywood. And that's what we want. So we do encourage self-funding, like 18 hours, how you did, and I would because if we keep looking for somebody who did a film like Rafiki, it's a big film, and those are people who we would use as us. Some of us who are advocates for like a film. For the film industry, I would use you as someone who did a big film to advocate for governments, for our governments, to put in place frameworks that are going to provide for self-funding for our films. And because if you keep going out, they will keep relaxing, they will be relaxed, because you are making films. You go look for funds out there, and they don't care. So that's what I'm saying, that we should focus more on, much as we go for funding, but again, putting more effort for pushing these guys in government to fund, or to put in frameworks that fund our films for sustainability, than than depending on funding. But I should encourage you to go back to look for funding, but as well come back here and push for government to encourage self-sustainability. Thank you.
Let's just take 2 more questions and then they answer.
Just to answer my friend here, I think the women are here mostly because they're very good at convincing. Anyway, my question is, of course, grants is mostly, you give me money, I'm not supposed to pay you back because it's not a loan. So my question is, what did you exactly promise them in terms of distribution, in terms of story? Like, yeah, what did you promise them back in order for them to, give you the money?
Let's take those 2 questions. Tony, you want to take that one?
Yeah, sure. You're talking about what did we promise the grant organizations? I mean, different grant organizations, like let's say, for example, Sundance. Sundance has a documentary fund. They also fund fiction. They have workshops. I encourage everyone. They even have like free online classes. I encourage everyone to go there. So to check it out. Sundance is interested in social justice topics. They're interested in stories of people making change. So it really depends. Every grant has their focus.
What do they get in return if they give you money?
No, you don't really, for grants per se, you don't really need to promise anything in terms of distribution. Some might be interested in impact distribution and might say, how are you going to reach Kenyans? A lot of times they ask, how are you going to reach your local audience? And you give a strategy of how you're going to do that, whether it's through cinema, whether it's through free screenings, etc. But they're not as focused on distribution as private equity firms would be, because they're interested in getting their money back. Yeah.
All right. Phoebe, will you take the other question? Or who will take the question from? The question was, how can we challenge our governments to be more involved in financing?
I think that's a really good point, and that is a very, very solid point. The more we go to the more we go for international funding, we're not forcing our governments to make decisions or to give us funding. That's absolutely true. But now, with somebody like me who just made Rafiki, and the government clearly didn't want that film to be made, it's incredibly hard to go to the government who doesn't want you to make a film to ask for money. You see what I mean? So there are restrictions with the relationship we have with our government, because our government still wants to be able to say, yes, we'll give you this money, but if you make the film the way we want it. You see what I mean? And that becomes a very complicated relationship, especially when it comes to our rights of freedom of expression that are enshrined in our Constitution. So how do we find ways to get money, yet retain artistic integrity? Because the voice should be of the artist and the people. It shouldn't be of the government telling us what to do. So that is still something that is in negotiation, but I completely agree with you. We should continue and continuously always advocate, and that's why Kalasha exists, so that we can continue advocating for the government to take up the responsibility of trying to fund films from the continent.
At the premiere of Subira, the CS was there, Joe Musheru. He was sent by the president. This is just to be the devil's advocate, because we can't keep bashing the government. So I just need to say a few things that I feel very strongly about. So Joe Musheru was sent to Hollywood such that Netflix can come here. When I got in touch with Joe for my second film, he said, listen, just please wait up, because Netflix will be here in April. Now we get yesterday the news, Dorothy was appointed the manager for international business, Netflix. What the government wants to do is a co-production such that Kenya makes a mark outside of the country for creative impact. So let's not keep bashing. If the passion is there, if the creativity is there, it's going to happen. I actually do believe that.
Can I just add just a little thing? And I think it's true what everyone has said. Of course, we do have to push the government. But, I mean, being Kenyans and being realistic, we know that will probably take time, and we do have to shove them. In terms of co-productions, I think that's a way of strengthening the industry altogether. But it's so often in relation to anyone outside Africa. But what about, you know, fellow Ugandan brother there? I mean, what we need to push the government to also make sure that even when we talk about this continental free trade area agreements, we're talking about how can I, being here, tap into the Nigerian market, or how can the Nigerian tap in here? We have to start working with fellow Africans. Otherwise, 100 years from now, there'll be another panel here talking about how that panel from 100 years ago didn't do anything to build the industry. So, I mean, I agree. Let's do more co-productions, but it's difficult, and now you have to maybe do it from a private angle, and that's why I'm kind of pushing for, yes, the government is there, but what are the chances right now if you go, they'll give you money? They won't. They probably won't, but let's tap into private individuals and private sectors, then just struggle with it, and the minute someone makes a film, a co-production with another, say Nigerian or say Congo, whichever, you do one and then it succeeds, people will start to pay attention, they'll start to see potential, and as Kenyans will follow like a flock. So it'll work out.
Hi guys, my name is Faki Liwali. I just recently got into the film industry together with my wife. We just finished production of our first film, 40 Sticks, hoping to launch early June, theatrical release. My question to the panel, I got feedback from one of the writers in the industry that I should consider screening the movie internationally before bringing it to Kenya, and their thinking was that the Kenyan audience seems to appreciate something when it's been appreciated by people outside than themselves. What's your take on that?
I think, let me just take one more. Yeah, there is. Then you can all take.
Okay, thank you so much for this opportunity. I just want for you to clarify or to help us, new upcoming writers and script writers. After you have written this great movie, how do you now go into marketing and the discussions about distribution and sales? And then, how do you now get your return on the investment? Thank you.
And then the third one here.
Thank you. Good afternoon, our panel. I just want to ask you if you've ever in advance known what the consequences might be if in private equity you're not able to meet your investors' returns.
So we'll start with the question there. What do you think about Kenyans hawata appreciate kitu unless iende abroad then irudi? What's our perception on that? And maybe I start with CP then.
Yeah, can I just answer that? Because though my aim for Subira was to be a world release film, I chose to premiere it, the international premiere or the world premiere in Kenya, you know. And I didn't think for a minute that I had to get outside accolades. No, absolutely none. And it was appreciated. We got the awards. There's no guarantee for awards, you know. We got the awards, the recognition. And actually based on that, when it was screening in cinemas, I had the world sales agent approach me and say, hey, we'd like to pick it up. So it was just the opposite, in fact. Just believe in yourself, in the quality. Don't worry about these international, conversations. The reason it's happening is because the film medium is like that, you know. It's not a stage show. Film can travel very far. That's what keeps us in the game, you know. And your message can travel. As an artist, you want to be heard by the world. Today, it's a very small world, you know. Don't just negate it like that.
Anyone else wants to? Okay.
Yeah. I can maybe on the kind of international thing. That's obviously something everyone says, and I think it's why it's made a lot of us as filmmakers believe that we do have to go through the traditional means of the festival run, because that's what gets you to go outside Kenya. I remember when we did our short films, we went through the festivals, but obviously from then things have quite evolved. So I think one test I usually do is if a big Kenyan movie comes out, I ask my aunt, and have you heard of this movie? It's in Cannes. and then she'd be like, "Can't snedwe." So, you know, I think there's this thing, our audience, in the filmmaker groups, here everyone knows, yeah, you go to Cannes, it's people care. You go to Oscars, it's brilliant. But outside our local audiences, I don't think everyone cares as much, you know. So if you say your movie went there, if that movie didn't connect with them, they wouldn't care. Because if you look at traditional examples, like, I don't know, Kitambo, maybe like 10 years ago, there was Kihenjo na Mashangi. You remember those days? It was, Kihenjo didn't go to Berlin Festival, he didn't go to BFI. Everyone used to just buy the DVDs to watch them. So I think why that's come that way, it's kind of a colonial legacy. You know, you have to have someone outside Kenya. You know, if you go and you stand there and it's just a crew of very dark-skinned people with that movie, and then there's a crew with, you know, white people on the other side, it's not the same thing. People are going to go to the white side, and I think we need to challenge ourselves in that way. We need to stop putting so much value on everyone outside, because what are we saying? Because we are saying ourselves we're not good enough. So we need to move from that, and only filmmakers you can say, actually, no, I'll go screen my film, even if it's in the church, and make the people appreciate it. Eventually they'll start to follow suit.
So the second, anyone wants to add on that, or I go to the second question?
So From a Whisper we started the screening locally, right? And then as a result of screening it locally, it was picked up for festivals and everything else. I think we also have to make a distinction between what we call straight-to-DVD movies and cinema releases, because they can be quite different, right? And that's why Nollywood is good at straight-to-DVD, straight-to-TV movies. And there's been that distinction in the industry. So there are films that are made not to have theatrical release, right? And there are films that are made to be bought as DVDs immediately, right? So you have to decide what kind of film your film is. If you want it to have a theatrical release, or you want it to go straight to DVD. And then once you do that, you can start planning your how you want to approach it. With Rafiki, we applied to screen it locally first, but we couldn't. So it went into international festivals. But knowing, because of how much investment was put in the film, when you go to a film festival is a film market. It's basically a place where you go and you sell your film. So you go to a film festival so that sales agents can watch it, so that they can pick it up and buy it, and so they can distribute it. Before Dorothy had the Netflix deal, you still had to go to film festivals so that, what's her name? I forget her name. Funa. So that Funa could watch it, so that she could pick it up, right? So there is a purpose for film festivals, because they really are created to be film markets first and foremost, and for films to be sold. So that's why we went into film festivals to sell the film. But we did try to release in Kenya first, and most film festivals allow you to release locally before you release at their film festival. But when you're looking at the festivals that you want to target, also find out their rules, because a lot of them will ask for world premiere. And if you're released anywhere else, they might not take it, or they'll take it in a different section. So also just consider those things when you're going through it.
So her question was about marketing.
I didn't understand. Were you talking about marketing scripts or a finished film?
A finished film. So how do you link that to distribution, and does it link to financing as well?
And I think that's part of the part of marketing is where you release, right? So if you release locally, like if you release in the Nairobi Film Festival, say, because the Nairobi Film Festival is getting people to come here and watch films so they can be picked up, to be bought, you can find a sales agent like that, and then they would sell your film across Africa or wherever, so that you can get your money back like that. But a film, you have to think of a film as a product, and all you're trying to do is get your product sold. So you just take it to the market, and find somebody to buy your buy your product in the market. And that's how you get your money back.
Because out of interest of time, I'm being harassed. I'll take her last question.
My question was, when you approach private equity, there's obviously going to be some kind of consequences if you don't actually, get the returns that they're after. Do they break that down to you straight away so that you're clear, like a bank loan sort of thing, given that I've worked mostly with grants and broadcaster money?
So when you get your when you get your money from film financiers, they're very clear, and they do break down how and when they recoup their money. So a lot of equity and film financiers take their money first. So before you've even made a profit or before anything, they're the first people. So it comes out of, if any money comes out of the theater, that money goes straight to them. And they tier it. And depending on how many financiers you have, you'd play this game of who gets first tier, who gets second tier, who recoups first, who recoups second, right? But because film can be high risk, they do know that sometimes the investment may take a longer time. But the longer it takes, sometimes the more interest you accrue, obviously. But film has an infinite lifetime. So they have an infinite lifetime, in theory, to recoup their sales, just as long as the film keeps selling. So that's some of the ways. I hope that answers your question.
I think in terms of dealing with individual investors, sometimes in contracts you have like a kind of a risk of statement of risk rather, and I mean, again, like Honore said, you do have to negotiate. So sometimes you go to an investor who will say, no, I have to have this money back, or I'll give you this certain amount of time to pay back, but also there are times when they can say, okay, this is a risk, if it all goes down the drain, okay, I'm happy to do it anyway. So it all depends on you and the relationship that you have with the person that's giving you the money. Yeah.
And out of interest of time, I don't think our panel will take any more questions unless anyone has a parting shot.
I have parting shot. Well, my parting shot is just to, I think what I would really, really yearn for, and something that we are also trying to do even for the subsequent films to follow, is just to kind of encourage people to share their stories, because you have lots of people who've made films right here in Kenya, and the experience is different. And I think if we all open up to the, as in be realistic about it, maybe that will help other people, and as well as collaborate, because you have lots of Kenyan people who've made films and they have been funded here. So I would encourage you to talk to those people and then get, if it's networking or what do you call them? Yeah, networks, contacts, maybe even funding. So I don't want to repeat the idea of going to grant. I don't want to say go to international festivals. I don't want to say anything. I just want to say tell your story, but make sure, start locally and then branch out. That's how Nollywood's done it, how everyone done it. We have to love our content and our work. And so, yeah, I think that's it. Fund it locally.
So just want to say two short things as my parting shot. In terms of independent documentary funding, there's the DocuBox grant. There's a DocuBox organization that gives funding to Kenyan documentary filmmakers and are now giving grants for shorts. So that's a source of local funding for now as we wait for government to get on board. And then a second thing is when it comes to financing locally, whether it's private investors, private equity, the number one job that all of us need to be thinking about or supporting people is people who are doing audience development and audience building. DocuBox is doing a lot of that with documentaries, because until we can prove that there's sizable audiences for Kenyan films, it's hard to convince investors, whether it's outside, whether it's here, that they're going to be able to recoup their money back. Yeah.
And with that, you want parting shot?
And it goes back to that. And that's what I've been saying. For as long, if you want to watch Kenyan films, right, you have to buy tickets for Kenyan films. If you want to be able to watch the content that we all want to make, you have to go out to the audiences. It doesn't matter who releases the film, go out and watch the film. So if there's local productions that are being made, go out and watch it for exactly that reason. We need the data. As filmmakers, we need the data so that when we're going to our next private investors, we can say, look at the money that this film generated as a result of its success. So do it for the data. Even if you don't want to watch the film necessarily, just buy the the ticket. So at least you're supporting the film in that way. It's really, really important, I agree, to build audiences, but also to build data so that we can use it, even take it to the bank and say, as a result of this past film, this is the audience that it collected, this is the money that it returned, can I get a loan? Because that should also be the next film. As filmmakers, we should be able to go to banks and get loans like other people do to be able to create the work that we're making. But in order to do that, we still need the data to be able to support it. And for that, we need the audience to participate so that we can continue to make films.
All right. Thank you very much to our panelists. And I hope everyone has gone home with a lesson. So have a good day. Asante sana.
Nimespend muda na vavanga na jina kumbe wenzangu wanaramba ebo